that'll also help me think about tomorrow morning. And and you please tell me what feels incomplete to you, or what you'd really like to, where you'd really like the discussion to go. If you want to go back to death, we can do that too. And before we leave, no one can leave without Michael making his announcements. This is our collective mindfulness.
I'll keep them very brief.
Yeah, but if people start drifting out and he's like grabbing for the mic, I'll feel really bad. So we just have to all remember that.
We're kind of all here.
You want to do now?
It was looking kind of scattered a few minutes ago.
Okay, we'll do now. There you go.
That's great. So this has to do with tomorrow. And my schedule's over here. The schedule, like life, just keeps changing, which is a great yoga for me in mindfulness of getting all the details right. So tomorrow, Monday, New
I don't think they can hear you.
New Year's Eve.
Nope.
Good.
Oh yeah, it's not on.
Nope. That's all right. It's not on? No,
It's
on. It's on. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to lead the hike for the intrepid hikers who are ready for a serious, it's like a mountain foot trail. It's not really a normal trail that's cultivated, to the Menla cliffs, which have a fabulous lookout over, the eastern Catskills. At 9 a.m., right after breakfast, we're going to fuel up at breakfast time. And it takes about 3 hours, and it should take us, if we move at a good pace, it'll be like an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half to get to the top, and then it takes less time to get down, and we'll do a meditation at the top, and that's the mountain that Bob wants to call Menla Mountain. It has no name, and we're going to try to figure out how to get it renamed Menla Mountain. So that's happening for people who want to. There is a sign-up sheet at the bulletin board at the front desk. That was just to get a sense of the numbers of how many people to look for. We're going to leave at 9 o'clock sharp, so don't be late if you want to come along. And we'll be back during lunch, or around lunchtime. And it feels amazing to do. So that's one add-on. And then and Sharon just announced, rather than teaching with Bob, tomorrow morning she's going to teach solo. And then at 1:30 to 2:30 in the Lhasa Inn gift shop will be the book signing. And again, please bring a post-it note with legibly written the name of the person you would like the book inscribed to. And I meant to do a quick plug, which Sharon is great at reminding me of actually promoting things. Bob and I and a team of artists worked on a graphic novel of the Dalai Lama's life and the true story of the invasion of Tibet, which is 300 pages, like a comic book. So it's a great, I know the gift-giving holidays passed already, but it's a great gift for family, for kids, adults. That'll be included there in the books that you can have signed. And Sharon has multiple books, all of which are fabulous. And we have many of them. I don't think we have all of her books, but that'll be a great opportunity for you to get your book signed. And then Alexander, who did the astrology talk the second night, is doing his 2-hour intensive from 2 to just before 4 in the Davy room, which is the practice room adjacent to the cafe here. And there was one slot available left in that 7-person intensive. So if it wasn't taken between lunch and now, there's still space for one more. And that means that Qigong with Paul is going to be in a different place than it has been, which it has been in the Davy room. It's now tomorrow going to be in the sanctuary, which is the septagonal building halfway along the upper road. And he's actually going to start at 1:45 with some extra optional stuff, because I guess there was interest in covering some things that he's not going to cover in the normal class starting at 2:15. So he'll be there half an hour early.
I was elsewhere.
No problem.
I apologize.
Thank you for your honesty. Paul is going to be at the sanctuary half an hour early to cover some additional optional material for the people. And he said you guys are a precocious group, so whoever's been going, he's very impressed. So he'll be there at 1:45. And then Bob will teach solo in the afternoon at 4. And then tomorrow evening, I didn't mention this before, but we have this amazing sound healing, these artists, these sound artists from Woodstock who are going to do a group sound bath for, I think, like 2 hours here in the empty. They're going to set it all up with gongs and various instruments. It's like something you've never experienced if you've done just a gong bath, or not just a gong baths are incredible. But it's truly a unique experience, and it's so we sort of lie down and get in the zone, and they take us on a journey with sound. So that's at 8 o'clock. So the dinner will be kind of more relaxed. We won't have to rush out, and that'll start at 8 p.m. tomorrow here. And then Sharon and I will reconvene everyone at the Lhasa Inn tomorrow night. We're not going to do the countdown and everything here. We'll do it around the fireplace, and we hope that you can all stay awake long enough to join us. My normal bedtime is like 9:30 or 10.
Do you ever think some years it's going to be just you and me?
Maybe, which will be just fine with
It's
me.
fine.
No offense. Anyway, it's always fun. And we do Quaker style, like you can set your own intentions. You can either not talk or you can offer something, and it's just a great way to kind of come together and share that as we're ushering in the new year. So that's the flow tomorrow. Does anyone have any questions?
When do you start gathering around the fire?
Well, anytime you, I know. Somebody asked if we could do something kind of fun and unusual. So I have board games that are really cool, including the Enlightenment game, which is where you energize your 7 chakras by doing these sort of psychic tests with people. It's a lot of fun. And there's some other games, word games and things. So I'm going to bring my collection of board games, and that'll be in the back dining room kind of like all day. So if you're not doing something and you want to play some games, you could team up with some people and have some fun that way. So the gap between the sound healing and the 11 o'clock session, it would be a good time to get a game in. And so if you haven't had enough programming, we can now throw in games into the mix.
And we'll toast in the new year.
Right. We'll have some hors d'oeuvres and some non-alcoholic drinks, and we'll literally do the countdown together, and it's just a lot of fun and very sweet.
And then on Monday morning, is it a talk again, or?
Monday morning, excuse me, you mean Tuesday morning?
Tuesday, I'm
right.
sorry.
On the 1st, the last day, the 1st of the month, the last day of the retreat.
First of the year.
The first of the year, that's right. We'll have, Alexander's going to do a further foray into individual charts for free, like the sort of 10-minute dissections of your chart for people who want to do that in this room. And for those of you who missed it, we had some skeptics like, oh my God, by the end of it, like they couldn't believe that he was seeing things in there about their parents and their own. It was just kind of really fun. It always is. It's the most fun is seeing the skeptics and how that evolves. And sometimes it doesn't go very well, but it seemed to go pretty well. And then simultaneously, that's Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning until about 11:30. And then Bob and I will lead a Naga Puja. So it's an offering ritual to help keep our huge friendly Naga friendly by feeding it snacks and milk and mantras and good intentions, and that'll be in the Devi room.
At what time?
At I think at 10. I'm going to announce that again tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll get more precise when Bob is back.
Yeah.
And breakfast has become brunch, right?
And brunch, right. Breakfast has been brunch for a few years on the last day. Some people like to just sleep in, especially if they've been up till 12:31 in the morning. It's going to start at 8 and it'll last until 11. And so you can sort of skip everything if you want to just sleep in and eat and go. We're pretty relaxed around here. So then that will be that.
How long before our bus do we leave here? Like, are there shuttles back to the buses?
There are.
I think about like the 11:11. I think a lot of us are.
Right. That's normally announcements for tomorrow, but we leave about a half an hour early.
Okay.
If there are more than 6 or 7 people signed up, we'll leave a little earlier than that and then come back and get people down there. And it's only like 7 minutes to get to town. Any other questions? All right, I'm so excited to have Sharon alone. I'm always busy in the morning, so I can't make the morning class. And
I've seen you here. I spot you. Oh,
she's
that's
very
great.
excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Time goes quickly, isn't it? Time is the oddest thing in the world. I wrote somewhere about this time when I was in Taiwan visiting one of my Tibetan teachers, this Lama named Yosho Kenrinche, and I was very close to him, and I really cared about him a lot. And he was always in sort of poor health, no matter what, but this particular visit in Taiwan, he just seemed very frail. And he was in the city, and we got to see him, which was great. And then he said, now I'm moving to some like remote place in the suburbs, so I'll see you in 2 days. So in 2 days, there was a whole group of us who were standing outside our hotel, and everyone was holding offerings of flowers and fruit, things to give him. And I kept thinking, like, I might only see him one more time. And it was like the saddest thought in the world, that I might only see him one more time. And we all got into these different taxis, and not one of us could find the place where he was. And then I thought, I'd give anything to see him one more time. Like, suddenly it seemed like the best possibility on earth, instead of the worst. And as it happens, one person figured out where he might be, and we all followed, and he was there, and we saw him. In fact, he lived many more years, and I saw him many more times. But it was such a switch, very same thought, just like, there you go. And of course, it's better for us to land on the what a precious thing for one more time, because you never know how life will evolve and how things will go. So I want to talk a little bit about love, loving kindness, some more. So partly in response to the goading of people like Bob, I started using the word love rather than loving kindness always. And so the last book I worked on before this one is called Real Love. And it almost arose totally out of one line in a movie. The movie is Dan in Real Life. My goddaughter had a partner, tiny little partner, like no speaking lines, but she barked. Because there's a talent show in the movie, and that was her audition for, being in the talent show. And she was really a young thing then, so it was like 11, 12 years old in the movie. And there's one character in the movie who says, love is not a feeling, it's an ability. Love is not a feeling, it's an ability. And I love that because, of course, it is a feeling as well, as several editors pointed out to me. And it is the feeling we maybe really crave. But when I think of love as an ability, it resonates very strongly with some experiences I'd had in Burma during intensive loving kindness practice, where I realized before then I always thought of love as kind of like a commodity in the hands of another who might bestow it upon me, but equally might take it away from me. And if they were to take it away from me, I'd have nothing. I'd just be bereft. But what about thinking of love as an ability, which means it's inside us? It's a capacity, it's a possibility within us. And someone might help awaken it or ignite it or threaten it, but it's ours. It's ours to tend, it's ours to grow, and so on. And that's really how things felt to me as I was practicing loving kindness. I realized that before then, it was almost like I could visualize the UPS person standing at my doorstep with the package of love, and then looking at the address and saying, I don't think so, and going somewhere else. I'm like, wait a minute, then I have nothing. But really, we never have nothing. We always have this capacity, this possibility. So what about love as an ability within us? And that is so resonant with the whole teaching of loving kindness. It's not necessarily a great big emotion. It's not necessarily romantic. It's not necessarily going to manifest in a particular style or form. But it is this capacity within us to care, to connect, to recognize ourselves in one another, to not be so incredibly bound to the sense of self and other and us and them. And it's interesting seeing when that, of course, that's a useful construct, but it's just a construct. You know, we don't live in a world, and the Dalai Lama is maybe the first person to say this, but we don't live in a world anymore where we can nicely believe that what happens over there is going to stay over there. Because what happens over there is going to ripple out over here. And what we do, it matters. The lines of interconnection are much clearer, they're much stronger. I remember when, you know, that whole series of terrible events happened in Japan and Fukushima, and I was reading a lot of international news online, and there was a French headline at one point which said something like, radioactive material is flowing across the Pacific due to fortuitous winds. And I thought, maybe they're fortuitous if you're in France, but you know, they're not that good if you're in Seattle. And anyway, don't we believe anywhere the earth is round? You can't go around the other side and like catch up with you. But the earth is round. You know, and it's not like that division that's going to keep us from being affected by what's happening over there. It's just not real. And science shows us this, and economics shows us this, and environmental consciousness certainly shows us this, and you know, even epidemiology shows us this. So then how are we going to be if we also have this sense of kind of we, along with the relative truth of self and other, and us and them? And so that's the challenge for our worldview. You know, can it get more realistic? Can it get more true to how things actually are? If it can get more true, it'll get more strong. It'll get more powerful, because that is the power of the truth. That we are kind of all in this together. You know, Bob and then I use that image of being on the subway and the Martians coming and zapping the subway car. There's a kind of truth about we're here together forever. You know, the consequences of someone's actions can really ripple out and rebound, and we might feel it, and you know, the consequences of our actions the same. And it's kind of how things are. And so coming closer to that doesn't make us weaker, it actually makes us stronger. So I'd say that in my years of teaching loving kindness, there are probably two main controversies I've encountered. There's several, but two main ones. One is the idea that love is a weakness, that it's sentimental, it's gooey, it leaves you kind of stupid. It's like covering over conflict or pain, things like that. And the other is this idea that it feels strange to us that love can be trained or educated or brought forth or cultivated. The literal word would be cultivated. Love and compassion are qualities that can be cultivated. And I don't know if we tend to think of them as gifts, and you either have them or you don't. If you don't, you're out of luck. Or we see them more as like spontaneous emotional eruptions, you know, or something like that. But from the Eastern point of view, definitely they can be trained. That's the whole point. Because they're considered emergent properties of how we pay attention. And we know attention can be trained. That's what meditation practice is. And so the more we train our attention, the more we are creating the conditions for these forces to arise. And they arise kind of naturally. It's one of the things I've loved about doing this practice and seeing it. You know, because it feels like it has the potential to be so artificial. And like, you know, oh, you know, you struck up that conversation with me in the elevator, and I really, the last thing in the world I want to do is talk to you, but I've now written 10 books on loving kindness. What if anyone found out, you know? Like, it wouldn't be seemly, so I better act like I care, you know? It's not like that. And here, too, the Dalai Lama is maybe my favorite representative of what feels like a natural response, not haphazard response. I mean, he's the one who practices 4 hours a day, you know? But a natural response in that you don't ever get the feeling, I certainly have never gotten the feeling, seeing him with all kinds of people, that he's sitting there thinking, oh God, you know, would you hurry up? You're the most boring person I've had to meet in a week, you know? But I am the Dalai Lama, you know, so I better act like, it's not like that. There's just this kind of presence, right? And greeting. And he quoted once, someone saying, I've never met anyone I've considered a stranger. And you feel that, actually, you know, and you think about how do we generally meet people? It's like sometimes we hardly even notice them. It's all such self-preoccupation. Like, what do they think about me? Did they like me? Do they like me more than they've ever liked anyone before? No, I said something stupid, they hate me, So what about meeting someone without that sense of estrangement? We see the power of that in somebody like him as well. And the thing that gets me is that it feels so natural. So people fear this practice sometimes. They fear they're setting themselves up to give themselves lectures all the time and trying to pretend to be something sanctimonious. And it's really not like that. Something shifts inside of us. So even if we lose it, we do perpetually lose it, there's a way of coming back that just feels so right. Like, oh, right, here you are. You want to be happy too. That's the truth of this moment. And it doesn't leave us weak and defenseless and giving in and succumbing in any way. It's something very different that happens when we're not so afraid and we're not so lost in this kind of corrosive sense of division and hatred. So as I've been saying, it's an experiment to see for ourselves if that actually turns out to be true. And every part of it is complex. Offering loving kindness to oneself, it can be very complex. The schema of the classical practice, not for any one session, because it would be way too much, but over a longer period of time, is that you begin with offering loving kindness to yourself. Then you move on, as we did, to someone who's a benefactor, that's someone who kind of makes your heart sing, someone who makes you smile. And then to a friend. And this might be even elaborated, like first a friend who's doing well right now, then a friend who's struggling right now, right? But it's oneself, a benefactor, a friend, a neutral person, which is secretly kind of my favorite part of the whole practice. A neutral person is someone you don't really like or dislike. You just feel kind of neutral toward them. And depending on the circumstance, whether you're in an intensive retreat or you're home, the suggestion is that you choose a neutral person, and they may not be perfectly neutral, but they're pretty neutral. You choose a neutral person where you're likely to run into them again now and then, because you get to kind of see, oh, is something shifted in my actual relationship to them. And then a difficult person, and then all beings everywhere. So let me talk about the neutral person for a minute, because I just like it so much. Sometimes people go through lots of trips, like they realize, oh, I don't have that many neutral people in my life. As soon as I meet someone or hear they exist, I judge them. I like them or I don't like them. Or sometimes people find I have a lot of neutral people in my life that I tend to objectify people. I don't really notice them. I discount them quite a bit. I feel a lot of indifference. But if you can find a neutral person, I think it does exemplify the way the practice works, which is that you're not trying to force a feeling, you're not trying to make something shift like forcefully, but you're paying attention differently, and just over time, that makes all the difference. So when I was practicing in Burma, which was for 3 months in 1985, doing intensive loving kindness practice, I just chose another person who was there. This woman who was traveling with a man whom I also didn't know, and she was from Latin America somewhere, and he was American. And I just kept offering her loving kindness. This, to make that point, was interesting because I didn't have some great eruption of feeling suddenly like, oh, my sister, It was like nothing. It was pretty boring. And then she left, and I left about 3 weeks or a month later. And I ran into her on the streets of Bangkok, and my heart just practically exploded. I thought, there she is. She's my neutral person. And I felt so much love for her. I'm sure she thought I was insane. And then just recently in California, I was with the guy that she'd been traveling with all those years ago. This is 1985, and we were just having a conversation. He brought her up. He said, remember when we first met in Burma and I was traveling with this woman? And I said to him, she was my neutral person. And he knew exactly what I was saying. And I was like, I still think of her in my heart, like flutters. And it's interesting because I don't know anything about her. I don't know her name, I don't know her sorrows, I don't know her joys. but just because every day,
Oh,
in that sort of high-powered environment, every day just was holding her in my heart. I'm wishing her well. My favorite story about that actually is probably this friend of mine who I teach one intensive loving kindness retreat a year at the Insight Meditation Society, which I moved from the winter to the spring. Yeah. And one year, and in the course of that 7 days, we go through each of those categories. Again, it's not that it's imagined you will do all of those categories in one session, but over time, you want to be able to cover them all. So I had a friend sitting that retreat, and then I didn't see her again for about 6 months. And I saw her at another retreat I was teaching, and she came up to me and she said, "I've fallen in love with my dry cleaner." And I looked at her and I thought I knew she, knew her dating history. I knew she wanted to start dating again. I was very happy for her. And she could tell what I was thinking just from looking at me. And she said, "No, not romantically, but he was my neutral person back in the retreat. I didn't embarrass him." She said, "Every day when I meditate, I hold him in my heart and I wish him well." She said, "Now I go into the store and it's like, how you doing? Everything okay?" She said, "It's like now," as she put it, "he's one of mine. It's like we're on the same team." So a long time went by, I hadn't seen her, and this magazine asked me to write an article on loving kindness, and I happened to run into her, and I said, "Would it be okay if I told your story and used your name, used your first name?" And she said, "Oh yeah." And she said, "I still go into that store, and I still have my heart just moves, in seeing him." So this is maybe a year and a half after her original retreat. And then a whole bunch of years went by, I didn't see her. Then I saw her at another retreat that I was not teaching, but we were both there. And I said to her, "How's your dry cleaner?" And she said, "I still go into that store, and I still have all of this feeling." She said, "I've moved on to the UPS person." Which I thought was just so great. And you think about the people in our lives we treat as though they were nothing. And what happens when we actually are just present with them, which is the whole point. The engine is presence, it's awareness, it's attention, and everything that then ensues. So I really love that part of the practice, although admittedly it can be extremely boring for a while. The principle is doing it in the easiest way possible. That's the trajectory. And the theory, therefore, is that offering loving kindness to ourselves is the easiest thing of all. And so they start there. There's some quotation from the Buddha, like you can search the entire universe for someone more deserving than your love and affection, than you are yourself, your own love and affection than you are yourself, and you won't find that person anywhere. You yourself deserve your own love and affection more than anybody. So that's the theory. What I always say, and I really believe, is that it's important to go back to that principle of doing it in the easiest way possible. Because it's almost like, as I keep saying, it's like strength training. It's building blocks. You don't go for the hardest thing of all right away. You kind of slowly make your way there. And if it's too hard, you go back. And that's the right thing to do. That's not like remedial work. It's not a practice of struggle. The clear reality is that we ourselves may not be the easiest person of all to kind of build this foundation on. We have to include ourselves somewhere. It's like you can't leave yourself out totally, because then you won't be building the inner resource that you need in order to, over time, sustain loving kindness toward others. But if it's too hard to be first, don't be first. Start with a benefactor who could be a child, could be a pet, could be that being who makes you smile. Start where it's easiest. And I've had people say all kinds of things to me, including, I couldn't do loving kindness for myself until I was doing loving kindness for all beings everywhere, and then I'd pop up, me too, And that's fine. You can also have fun with this practice. It doesn't have to be so solemn and serious. So that's an important principle. It reappears later on when we're offering loving kindness to a difficult person. Because that is a very thorny question. What in the world does it mean to have compassion or loving kindness for someone that we actually don't like? and that we're not going to agree with, and that we're not going to want to spend any time with. And it happens, doesn't it? So according to the same principle, you would not want to start with the most unthinkable person, who has harmed you so much in your life that it's just unimaginable, or who, in your view, has behaved so terribly on the world stage that you just can't picture it, right? Start with someone with a little bit of annoyance or dis-ease or fear, some conflict. And you more slowly make your way over. And as I said earlier, this is not a popular instruction. Many, many people don't like this. But I just offer it because that's the instruction. And so if you ever decide you want to give yourself a break, that's the way. There's nothing wrong with deciding this is too hard for me right now. And going back to offering loving kindness to someone for whom it's easier, or for yourself. If you're sitting there kind of fretting or, hurt or something, you're the one who's struggling like that. So, how many of you do loving kindness practice? Sort of as a matter of course, okay. So we have the sequence. What I usually say in terms of a daily practice, because you're not going to sit for all that long, is that the basic bookends tend to be starting with yourself. In fact, you do start with yourself, and ending with all beings everywhere. And what you do in the middle might change all the time. Maybe your friend's daughter's graduating from high school, and so you want to include her in that middle part. Or you have a friend having surgery, you want to include that person in that middle part. Or you go to the dry cleaner, and you want to include the dry cleaner in that middle part. Or, it depends on how much time you have and how many beings you can fit in, but you don't want a sense of being in a rush. You want to be cultivating that sense of concentration and presence. So probably it means slowing down, having fewer objects. And those make good bookends that starting somewhere, either with yourself or the benefactor, and ending with that more global expanse of loving kindness for all beings everywhere. And keep looking, what does it feel like? That's the whole point, is to understand the nature of how these things affect us. I have a friend, Barbara Fredrickson, who studies positive psychology. She's a researcher at the University of North Carolina, and she uses loving kindness meditation quite a lot in her research to affect these positive states. And I think her first book was called Positivity, and she has this system in there, or she has this theory in there, which is known as the Fredrickson theory of broaden and build, which I like a lot. And her point of view is that when we cultivate positive states, loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, peace, gratitude, generosity, that those states function to broaden our awareness and build a sense of inner resource. So we don't cultivate them to go lie on the couch and feel good about ourselves and contemptuous of other people. We cultivate them. We don't even cultivate them for the kind of giddy high of them. We cultivate these positive states because of that result. So to broaden means to have an expanded sense of possibility. We feel free. We can breathe. We see options. We don't feel imprisoned. We don't feel so shut down. Everything kind of opens up. If you practice generosity, if you practice loving kindness, that's what happens. And that made a lot of sense to me, because I think about the states, let's say the states of the hindrances that so often arise in meditation. Anger, fear, desire. Not when we just feel them, but when we're really socked in there. Those are states that all provoke tunnel vision. Everything closes down. There's a collapse. We don't see options. We can't breathe. If you think about the last time you were really, really angry at yourself, however long ago that was, and just sort of bring it back, it's not a time where you're also thinking, you know what? I did 5 great things the same morning. I said that stupid thing. Those 5 great things, they're gone, right? Everything collapses around that identity. I am that idiot who said that thing, right? It's tunnel vision. You think about when you are lost in desire. Longing, like if I was obsessed with getting one of these paintings home. You know, maybe 90 other great things happen. I don't even notice them. They're not enough. It's only that painting that will ever make me happy. Right? Everything locks down around that seeming certainty that not only will it make me happy, it will make me happy forever. I can't wait.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So sort of more tactical, right? When you have that feeling, like, I will only be happy if I get that painting. What in the moment is a useful tool to sort of bring yourself out of that collapsing of sort of that feeling?
I would probably start with trying to observe the feeling more than bring yourself out of it. Because it's interesting, you know, it's like this is your chance to observe all the dynamics, you know, in your body and your mind of that feeling. And that very observation helps you, keeps you from like stealing it in the night, or, you know, like selling your car so you can buy the painting, or, you know, so that's the first step. And I think by the time, you know, I think that protects us also from taking action, is because we're more interested in the feeling than anything. And it's not that you want to follow out the feeling, that's true too, you know, but sometimes if we want to not feel the feeling, that's a little risky also, because we feel it, you know, it's there. And then we start judging ourselves, like, oh, why am I so full of desire, you know, so like, you know, I'm so awful, I'm so terrible, whatever. So I use all of these things as opportunities to observe and get there. You know, so you can see that those states, when we are lost in them, I don't mean the simple feeling of anger or fear or desire, but when we're really, really in there, they all will give us tunnel vision. So it makes sense to me that the opposite states will do the opposite, right? They'll kind of open us and clarify things. I even done some research. I always talk about this because I think it's so weird. I've done some research that if you do things like cultivate these positive states, like loving kindness, your peripheral vision will improve. Isn't that weird? So I keep thinking before my next driver's exam, I have to, like, you know, do that. And then build is the second part of her theory. It's broaden and build. So build means develop a sense of inner resource. And that actually is the stress response. It's the stressor, whatever that is, with whatever resource is meeting it. And that's changing all of the time. You might have a very minor thing happen, but you're pretty wasted anyway. You're exhausted, you're depleted. You don't feel anything within you much to meet it. And so you have a huge stress response, even though the stressor may not be so gigantic. Or maybe you have a pretty big thing coming towards you, but you have within you the sense of some wholeness or some capacity, right? And then you meet it in a different way. Even though it's not a delightful experience, it's very different than when you just feel overwhelmed. So we build a sense of resource. And this is another reason why at some point it's very important to include ourselves in the field of loving kindness. You can't always leave yourself out. Because that's part of building that sense of resource. And this too is not always so popular. It feels selfish. It feels, you know, for those in the teachings, it would be considered self-cherishing sometimes, or, you know, self-preoccupied certainly. And but it's not. It's too. It's like science. This is in the end, you can't get something from nothing, and we need a kind of sense of resource in order to meet our own life situation, in order to try to help. So all of these practices like loving kindness and compassion are considered practices of generosity. Sometimes it's confusing just because of the grammatical construct of the phrase, like, may I be happy, may you be happy, may you be peaceful. And people say to me, well, who am I asking? And I say, you're not asking anybody, you're giving. You're offering. It's like you're handing someone a birthday card, saying, may you have a happy birthday. May you have a great year. That's the vibe of it. Not like, may I be happy, you know? But it sounds like asking just because of the grammar, but it's not. They're practices of generosity of the spirit. And we often look at material generosity because it's such a more concrete model of everything that's involved in that kind of activity. So In the Buddhist teaching, they say the best kind of generosity comes from a sense of inner abundance. Because then it's like the Dalai Lama is saying hello to somebody. It's this natural flow. It doesn't feel artificial. It's not compelled by, institution or situation. It's just this kind of natural flow. And I think, we can intuitively understand that. I certainly feel I came to understand that more by living in other cultures where, say Burma, for example, where I went to practice in the 80s, we never paid like for room and board even when we were in the retreat center, because everything that we needed was provided by the people of Burma, which was clearly one of the poorest countries in the world. And that meant 2 meals a day, breakfast and then lunch before noon, every day. Every morsel of food was offered. Sometimes it would be a person, sometimes it would be a family, sometimes it would be a whole village that would come together. And every kind of occasion was marked by people going to the monastery and feeding people. It's your daughter's birthday, that's what you do. It's your birthday, that's what you do. You don't celebrate a birthday by expecting to get gifts, you celebrate by giving gifts. So you go to the monastery, you offer the money, and they cook the food to feed as many people as you can, and so it becomes a combined effort. Or somebody dies in your family, in their honor, you go to the monastery and you offer food. In fact, there was one time, the meals are a little bit formal, in that it's kind of a processional into the dining room. You come in, you bow to the Buddha, and then people are sitting around these tables on the floor, maybe 4 or 5 people around a table, and the food is served family style. So I went in, I bowed to the Buddha, and I sat down, and I looked at the food, and I thought, that's so weird. That looks like a Jewish meal. That looks like chicken soup, and that looks like white fish salad, and that looks like, I thought it was hallucinating, like something had gone really wrong in my meditation. It turned out there was like a tiny little Jewish community in Rangoon, and someone who died. And so the family didn't just offer the money, they offered the recipes. So I was like, this is so strange. But then there's a ceremony which, maybe we'll do, I don't know when we'll do it, but called sharing merit, where if you've done a good deed, you offer the positive energy of it to someone who's died or someone you care about, or to all beings everywhere. So they did a sharing of the merit ceremony for their family members. That's how I found out that it really was a Jewish meal. But the whole idea is generosity. The whole thing was built on generosity, and it's such a poor country, especially then. And you just saw these people were so happy to give. Like nothing made them happier. And then coming back. And sometimes, people might have a vast amount more by an external measure, but not all have the internal feeling of having enough. And it's very hard to give. So it makes sense that sense of inner abundance, or at least inner sufficiency, is the easiest way. It's like the best way to generate a sense of generosity. And so too it is with loving kindness. If we feel like we have nothing, we are nothing, it's very hard. So we spend some time continually, kind of cultivating and recultivating that sense of inner abundance, so that the generosity of loving kindness can be more natural and more flowing. So, yeah.
The question is as follows. For the second category, the benefactor, the person you love, what do you think? Sometimes when I do loving kindness meditation, sometimes I'm so tempted to send it to people who are dead.
Yeah.
To my father, my grandmother. What do you think of it? I mean, I know nothing's wrong. We can customize, but is it important that the person be alive?
I actually don't think it's important that the person be alive. There is some teaching about there are many distinct benefits that come from loving kindness practice. One is the loving kindness itself as a force within us, and the fearlessness and the other things that come with that. Another benefit is just sheer concentration. Because for some people, it's a much easier concentration object than, say, the breath. For one thing, I started talking earlier today about that balance between calm and concentration and peace on the one side, and energy and interest and wakefulness on the other. So if you're in a state where calm and peace tend to be stronger than energy, one falls into a state that's usually called a sinking mind. I call it the ooze. You're just kind of oozing along, you know, it's peaceful and not very sharp, but it's fine. So you actually fall asleep. So I found, for example, for me, it's very easy for me with the breath to ooze along for a good long time before realizing it. Whereas with loving kindness, because it's verbal and those phrases mean something, I tend to pick it up much, much sooner, because what happens usually is the phrases get garbled if you go into that state. You know, I found myself in Burma, for example, repeating, may you be filled with suffering. No, may you be free of suffering, you know. My favorite example of that still, I'm waiting for someone to tell me a better story, is a friend of mine who's Swiss, who came to IMS to sit for several months, and because he's Swiss, English is literally his fourth language, and so his phrases were something like, may I be healthy and well, may I live with ease. And one day he found himself repeating, may I be wealthy in hell, may I live with eels. And he just kept repeating it. And then he thought, that sounds weird, you know. He went all the way back to Swiss German and said, oh, that is weird. You know, for some people, it's a tremendous tool for concentration. And attendant to the classical teachings is the belief that if you practice strong concentration methods, you can attain these states called jhana, these alternative states of consciousness. That's almost what those practices are designed to do. So it does say in some texts that if the recipient of your loving kindness has died, it's going to be more difficult to attain jhana using that object in others, which is why you sometimes don't do that. I don't know many people who are really held bent on jhanic states for loving kindness. It's more the loving kindness that people are practicing for. So it's from that perspective that I say, it seems fine to me. It also, you know, it depends on your belief system. Like, do you need to change the words a lot? You know, if you happen to have a belief in a cosmology that includes rebirth, you don't. Like those people in Burma, when they were offering the force of their practice to their father, you know, their late father, their father was somewhere in their minds, you know, being reborn. And so that wasn't a struggle for them. If it's a struggle for you, then you have to think, what can you say? Sometimes it becomes just a kind of simple gratitude, you know, or acknowledgement, so that it doesn't feel strange, you know. But that's really up to you.
Let me gather the. If you are, I think this is picking up from the question about meditating on someone who's dead. And I had a question about meditating on someone who's ill, and let's say ill or very old and, you know, and then going to die very soon, that when you say, may you be healthy, may you be safe, I guess, who's the you that you are saying that to? Like,
what do you mean, who's the you?
Like if he's meditating on his father, or if I'm meditating on my mother who's old, I mean, she's, you know, I do want her to be healthy, but at some point, fairly soon, she's going to, you know, decline. And how do I genuinely meditate on that thought, may you be healthy? And I know that there's different types of healthy, but could I also be thinking in terms of a different incarnation or a different energy level?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, it's your mother. You're offering loving kindness to just stay with your mother in this incarnation. You have several choices, and you have to see what seems right to you. In that case, you might experiment a little bit with the phrases or a lot with the phrases. Sometimes may you feel safe. That would be an occasion where you would want her to feel safe, whatever. And how are you defining safety? It can't mean nothing untoward will ever happen, because it can never mean that anyway, because it's not life. Health might well get to have a different meaning. Sometimes we use the same phrases and it doesn't matter because it's the energy, you know, it's the kind of vibrational energy of the offering. And when you hand someone a birthday card, you know, we don't really say, life is tough,
Right.
go up and down all the time. You know, there's always blame in this world, just like the Buddha said. You can write that book, not everyone's going to like it, you know, but why not do the best you can? I hope you make it through the year okay. You know, that's not what we say. We say, have a great year. You know, so we kind of do that in the loving kindness as well. But if it, you know, the test is really, if it feels like so wrong to you, it feels like such a struggle, it's not worth it. It's much better then to completely revamp what you're saying. You know, may your last years be peaceful, or may you not struggle. You know, whatever seems right to you. And it is a kind of human communication, so you don't have to try that hard, you know, to change it in some way. But I found, you know, because I practiced in Burma, which is somewhat less flexible than, it's like going to the Vatican or something, you know, and so I had fewer choices at that point about like altering phrases and things like that. So my phrases actually were different. The phrases I was given that I practiced with were beginning with myself, may I be free from danger. May I be free from mental suffering. May I be free from physical suffering. May I live with ease, or have ease and well-being. And I had an extraordinary transformative time for 3 months practicing in Burma. And I came back, this is 1985, I started teaching loving kindness. And those were the phrases I was suggesting to people because those were my phrases and they had been so powerful for me. And this is like a California joke, but I'm not in California, so I can tell it. You know, I taught in Barrie, that was fine. I taught in Boston, that was fine. I taught in different places on the East Coast, it was fine. It was even fine in Santa Fe. And then I went to California. I was leading a retreat, and I gave the first instruction. And at the end of the sitting, I rang the bell, and I looked up, and there was a line of people waiting to complain to me that was like sort of stretched to that back wall. And everyone was saying, I don't want to repeat a word like danger. I don't think it's helpful to say, you know, suffering, 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 even though it's free from suffering. And while I personally had had an extraordinary time using those very phrases, it's just not good to struggle. And so that's when the phrases kind of became, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. And sometimes I say that anyway because people like to know the range. And so that just gives you a sense of the range. But anyway, my point was that I was doing those 4 phrases, and I didn't like that last phrase much, like may I live with ease, or may I have ease and well-being. I thought, well, that's trivial. You know, especially compared to the intensity and gravitas of may I be free of mental suffering, which I like quite a lot. Mm-hmm. But I just kept repeating it because that was the assignment. And one day it was like something shifted inside of me, and I thought, wow, you know, our lives are so complicated. We have so many choices and so many decisions and sometimes so many crazy moral dilemmas. I thought, may I live with ease? That's like my favorite phrase. And that, it really shifted just in the doing of it. And then this is in contrast to a friend of mine who, you know, years after this, after I was left Burma and was teaching, and the first time she heard the phrase, may I live with ease, she loved it. It became like her North Star for decision making. And the way she put it in life was, does this pass the may I live with ease test? And something had to pass for her to say yes. And she worked for many years for the federal government. She's since retired. And I have another friend who's an artist who made me a pad, like a stamp and a pad. And the stamp said, does this pass the may I live with ease test? So I lent it to my friend who loved the phrase, and made the phrase actually. And she said randomly every now and then she'd stamp a document in the federal system. And you just pass the naivety tests, you know, and then she'd send it on through. And every time I tell that story, I think she's retired. I should get that stamp back. You know, so we feel differently about different phrases. And if it's a struggle, you need to change the phrase. If it's maybe interesting to try it out a while, see if it shifts. And if it changes for you, because certainly they can.
And so I really dislike it when people say, you know, stay happy and get well soon. And I'm like, I might die. So thank you for those great wishes of something that's totally unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, like, earlier you defined compassion as like, or maybe Bob, moving towards to see if you can help.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was, yeah. And so I was wondering, like, things like freedom from, the only one that's like really in that person's control is freedom from mental suffering.
That's right.
The others are not. So do we pick them because partly this is about a motivation to move toward making the world better for people? Or do we shift them so that like it's more about what's in their control?
I don't know that I would do it so much totally about what's in their control. Although that's a really good template, you know, because it's also our gift, right? It's like our blessing. It's our blessing to someone else. It's our blessing to ourselves. But it can't be like wishful thinking, you know, or an effort to be a savior, you know, or be in control in some way. It's like when they talk about these days in the research, the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy being that kind of resonance, you know, with somebody, like almost that felt sense of like, ooh, that likely really hurts, or, you know, it's scary or whatever. And compassion being one of several possible responses. So that felt sense, you know, I see it a lot as sequential, like maybe we have that sense of empathy, but then it's like the psychologist I quoted who is blaming all those people. You know, like I told you 6 months ago what to do. If you don't think that, you'd be better. Or we're so exhausted, we feel we can't meet the person, or we're frightened by what they're saying or representing, and so we pull away. And one of those possible non-compassionate responses is being the savior. I'm going to fix you. I'm going to be the one. And anyone who's been sick, you know, or is sick, resonates with, it's a very hard terrain to navigate, because I've seen, say when my friend Ramdas had this stroke, you know, which was a massive stroke that he wasn't supposed to survive, and then he did. He had affected a lot of people's lives, and they loved him, and they were grateful, and they were offering from that genuine place. But sometimes the effort they were making, it was kind of a little bit of pressure. Like, take 15 drops of this and you'll definitely be walking again in 2 weeks. You know, something like that. And so it was beautiful, and it was also a little off, both at the same time. And I remember visiting him once. He'd just gotten out of the rehab hospital. He was living in California then, before he moved to Maui. And his living room was piled high with stuff like that. And I was struck by the beauty, but also I could see in him, it felt like a kind of pressure, like, what if it doesn't work? Will you still love me? Are you still here? You know, what does that mean? Am I then alone, you know? Or is someone going to accompany me in those harder places? And the day that I was there, he got a bottle of Ganges water from the Ganges River. And I had exactly one of those messages, like, take 15 drops of this and you'll definitely be walking in 2 weeks. And I said, don't drink that. You'll get cholera if you drink that. Definitely don't drink that, whatever you do, you know. You know, so I keep coming back to the word blessing. Like, what would be the blessing I would offer? It needs to be not coming from that place of wanting to be in control and not wanting to face someone else's suffering. But it is that kind of generosity, and however that lands, maybe for your mental suffering is, in a way, the only one that's in our control, but, you know, may you live at ease. Some people would extend to be, may you live with ease of heart with whatever comes your way in life. How else do we have ease? You know, it's not from a nice apartment, sadly, you know. which is easier to get than ease of heart, you know, and feeling safe. Well, how do we feel safe? It's not because we have any kind of assurance, any one of us, about anything. And if that's what we want in order to feel safe or sunk, you know, a lot of it is kind of generated from our own heart and perspective and community and things like that. So it's somewhere in there. And I know, like, sometimes I tell this story about Ram Dass, and I feel a kind of disapproval in the room. And then, especially when this is one place I teach in Santa Fe, where usually I tell it, and then everyone has to get online for the bathroom, because there are very few bathrooms. And all these people come up to me waiting online for the bathroom and saying, it was just like that. I know exactly what you mean. When I was sick, it was just like that, you know. You appreciate the generosity and the beauty and the effort, and you also understand, like, you know, it's very subtle. That kind of genuine offering that isn't about, it's not self-referential in any way. So. In fact, Ram Dass, he's a lot of fun to be with these days. He's always a lot of fun, but you know, he has been in a wheelchair for like 20 years, I think by now, 19 years maybe. And so he's got all the attendant, you know, infections or whatever happens, you know, as a result of that. And certainly his scope of travel is limited. And, there's some amount of physical pain, and his speech is so totally different when he, how many of you have heard an early Ram Dass talk, an earlier Ram Dass talk? You know, he was like maybe the most eloquent person I've ever heard, you know. And now, of course, it's halting. It's still amazing. His mind is totally clear. And he just can't always find the words. And it's always interesting to be on the stage with him, because you know exactly what he wants to say, and you know you can't say it for him. So it can take a while. You know, so his life is very different. But he once, in a Hawaii course, he was saying that of all the things that he'd been through since the stroke, you know, the thing that was the most difficult and the most liberating was actually accepting help. Because, and it's true, I've known him for so long, I've known him since 1971. You know, he would help anybody, but you couldn't even like thank him, you know, without him like bristling, you know. It was very, very hard for him to receive, and he was saying this up on stage, and he said it was so hard, but it was the most liberating thing of all. And he said one of his most famous books is called How Can I Help? And he said, now I want to write a book called How Can You Help Me? You know, so is that what we mean when we say may you be happy, or you know, maybe, you know, there's some enormous internal shifts that are available to us whenever, you know, we set our intention there.
I have just a question about may you live with ease. Somewhere along the way, I was given the teaching that part of the practice had to do with kind of basic needs like shelter, food, enough income to support whomever, and someone might be responsible for that, so that life wasn't difficult, so that one might realize aspirations as,
I think that's a reasonable, one very clumsy translation of it is may I take care of myself happily, you know. May I live with ease. But the trouble with the word ease is that to us sometimes it implies luxury.
Yeah.
You know, so may I have like a nice bed and, you know, extra special sheets and, you know, like towel that's really soft. You know, like, that's what I think of when I think of ease. I think of a really good hotel room where I don't have to make the bed. And it's those great sheets. Like, so it's not meant to be that.
Yeah,
you know?
right. I talk about sufficiency.
Yeah,
things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Thank you.
So whenever you're talking about compassion and loving and kindness, I keep on going back to what I think about when I hear solidarity or when I try to see it in the field where I work. So I would like for you to talk a little bit about it, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, that of course is what I'm writing about. So you and I have to have tea in here. I mean, it's very tricky, but I think of course, you know, the great leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. or somebody like that, and that's exactly what he's talking about, or Nelson Mandela, you know. It's very tricky because of the confusion about loving kindness meaning weakness or giving in or being compliant or something like that, and not necessarily seeing it as an incredible source of strength. And some of it, I think, is only resolved by looking at our own experience. Like, what's it like when I harbor all that hatred? You know, what's it like when I, you know, obsess about someone else's faults instead of look at the full flowering of my own capacity? What's it like when I accept a story someone else tells about me? And I just absorb it, you know, rather than saying, I mean, when I did, you know, some work with striking fast food workers in New York, and one of the things I really felt was that, you know, here are people who are striking, who are working, they're really hardworking people, and you know, a lot of them are living in homeless shelters because their salaries are so low, and ultimately decided to go on strike for a higher minimum wage, and a lot of them were saying, like, my parents didn't want me to do it, my family didn't want me to do it because I might lose everything, you know. And it had little enough, but you might lose everything. But there's something that rose up in people that said, I'm worth more than this. You know, so that's the feeling, like, of loving kindness for oneself. And it doesn't make you weaker. You know, it made them a lot stronger. And you can kind of see it in these various situations. And even the seemingly improbable, if not impossible, prospect of loving everybody. I mean, that's what these leaders have said all along, right? I have in some earlier book a story about this time through a friend. I spent a day with this man, Miles Horton, who had founded the Highlander Folk School, which was a place in Tennessee that was an early training place for civil rights workers and the very, very early environmental workers. And he was very funny, like, you know, we just came from different worlds, clearly, and he, I talked about meditation, which he wasn't that interested in, and I said, well, what do you do? Like, what do you do when you're, you know, because there was so much pressure. It was one of the first integrated places in the South, and it was like lawsuits and violence, and he said, I just look at the mountains. I just go sit outside and I look at the mountains. And then we started talking about metta meditation, about loving kindness meditation. And he was very funny. He said, he didn't want to hear anything about it. He said, oh, Martin Luther King Jr. He said, Marty used to say to me all the time, you got to love everybody. And I used to say, no, I don't. I only have to love the people who deserve to be loved. And he said, Marty would just laugh and laugh. And when I have told that story, which is actually not that often, very often I've heard a response of like, well, look what happened to him. He got assassinated. As though there were cause and effect there, which I find very interesting. You know, like if he'd been meaner and more vicious and hostile and hateful, he would have been safe, is the implication, right? So I look at that a lot, you know, and, you know, I think a lot has to do with clearly one's own experience of loving kindness or love in this sort of more impersonal sense, and how it might be a strength rather than something else. But, yeah. And maybe we'll sit in a minute. I'll just tell you how I ended that in my last book, which is a little bit tied into it. You just asked. So I turned in the book, late. But also a day early. And I was in England about to sit a retreat myself. And it was 2 years late and a day early when I turned it in. And I'm not being recorded. I might just... Good. This is another publisher story, which I'm going to take off the list. So I turned in the book. I got an away message from my publisher, like on vacation back in 2 weeks or something like that. And I thought, great, you could have given me another 2 weeks. Anyway, I turned it in, and I didn't hear from him for a long time. And then for a moment, and then we'll do some loving kindness and close for the evening. You also have to tell me what you want to do tomorrow more than anything.
I think we should all go to Washington and circle the way.
With love and build.
Something.
Do you want to get me some more ginger tea? You can tell me I can do more.
I've seen that.
Maybe that's tomorrow morning.
Yeah. You have a little honey in here.
All of love. It's a good article. It's a good cartoon.
Exactly. Teach wise ages. Something wise
That's great. That's great.
Whoever it was like, that felt like that.
Oh, it's oh yeah. What do you do with just don't get Is there a way to, still way to break it down?
Well, I mean, it depends. I really know him. Like I know his reputation. If I knew him, I might say, "What about your sister-in-law? Like, what about that? You think there's any hope for just not engaging in the same old argument? Wishing her well. Or look at how she gets to you each time. You're letting her in. Yeah, with him, I just thought, I didn't think of it at the time, but I was do you think, I would have probably asked him, do you think that would hurt him? Made him weaker? Do you really believe that? What was his effect on you? Because it would have been really interesting. That's why Marty laughed,
What do you mean? What do we want to do tomorrow?
I have you all by myself tomorrow morning, so uncovered. Somebody just asked me about reactivity. No, that's good. I'm going to ask you have Bob for 2 hours in the afternoon. I can ask him what he's going to.
Okay. I'd love to hear your
Okay.
But you know what? I think also doing it, obviously, you feel. Yeah.
To have both of you sick. You're not sick as well.
No, I'm not. I have more. I have asthma, but I do feel it. Yeah, no, I was glad he went home. Yeah. No, I'm glad he went home. Yeah.
For that, not you.
That's my last book, Real Love.
Thank you.
You can tape me again, Justin. I'm safe to record. Thank you so much. So the practice of loving kindness, they say that in any moment, one of three things may be predominant. One is the phrase, one is the sense of the recipient, whether it's visual or just a sense, like they're here. And the third is a feeling that may come. And, when I emphasize no feeling, it doesn't mean there's never a feeling, but there may not be a feeling and things could be moving along quite well, actually. So because the feeling may come and go, the sense of the recipient may come and go, the bottom line tends to be the phrases, but you may be in some space where you don't feel like saying another phrase silently. You just want to be with that being, and that's fine, or you want to be with that feeling, and that's fine. And, since some of you raised your hands that you were familiar with loving kindness practice, if you do it with phrases, then you've got phrases, and if you're happy with your phrases, then just keep using them, because why not? If you're not happy with those phrases, or you're doing this for the first time, and you're just kind of experimenting, really you can find your own. The criteria is that it needs to be general enough or big enough so that largely you can offer the same phrases to others. Not always, because people will come or beings will come to mind where it just seems right to use different phrases, but you don't want to always be sitting there thinking, what about you? Like the last time you had a new job, you were a mess, so not that, because it's just endless thinking. So in that case, I'd say experiment with these phrases for a while, unless there's a struggle. You know, some people cannot stand the word happy. And I think, okay, don't use it, you know. But if you can bear to, you know, it's a reasonable enough phrase with a wide enough meaning. So until you settle on phrases that you really do care about more, at least gives you a template to continue on with the practice. So we're going to go on and do basically that description I used, starting with yourself, ending with all beings, and doing something else in the middle, which is really the template for how we practice at home. And if it's unbearable to start with yourself, you're not the only one. Start with a benefactor. Okay? So see if you can sit comfortably. You can close your eyes or not. Just let your energy settle into your body. Remember the phrases that seem right to you. And you can begin offering them to yourself. Just gathering your attention behind one phrase at a time. I have a friend who said he thought he'd get extra credit if he said more phrases. So he said, no, I said, hold on, don't do that. Really, with enough space and enough silence so that you're really there behind one phrase. And then the next. And see if you can think of a benefactor, someone who's helped you, maybe directly, maybe from a long distance, never having met. The being who makes you smile, and bring them here. Even if the words don't seem perfect, they're still the vehicle of our heart's energy. So see what happens as you offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. And just for fun, for a few moments, let's have the benefactor offer loving kindness to you. So put yourself in the position, so to speak, of the recipient. and see what it's like. You may feel grateful, you may feel embarrassed, unworthy, you may feel resentful, who knows? But let's see if those emotions can wash through you. Let them come, let them go. As you steady your attention on the phrases, someone offering loving kindness to you. And then someone here you didn't know before you got here. You still might not quite know their name or anything or much about them, but regardless, this being, even if you don't feel neutral toward them, is kind of replacing the neutral person in our practice for now. As a living being, they want to be happy just as we all do. As a being, they're as vulnerable as we all are to change, to loss. So see what happens as you offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. and everybody here, including yourself. And all beings everywhere. Thank you.